Good morning, everybody. I think we will get started. Welcome to this webinar on our Britain Talks Climate research, our Scotland insights. Britain Talks Climate is a collaboration project between Climate Outreach and More in Common with support from the European Climate Foundation. And for our Scotland Insights, we were also delighted to enjoy the support of Keep Scotland Beautiful and Stop Climate Chaos Scotland. My name is Rachel Orr. I am the CEO of Climate Outreach. I'm just going to run us through a couple of bits of housekeeping and then hand over to Becky from SCCS to introduce the session this morning. So just first of all, we are recording today's webinar. For everybody who's joined, your voice will not be recorded because when we get to posting questions, we'll ask you to do that in the Q&A, but this will be recorded and then will be on our website for anybody who couldn't join us live this morning. You will notice that for now we have disabled the chat and the Q&A function. We will turn those back on again just as we come to the end of the presentation, and then would really welcome questions from you in the Q&A bar. And yes, we will move into that Q&A session for the last part of the webinar after we've taken you through some of the key findings. And what a time to be talking about what people in Scotland think and feel about climate change and climate policies and politics. And I think for us, there is one really important and enduring message that comes through from this research, and one that I think is even more important given the political events of the last 3 or 4 weeks. And that is that we heard that people in the UK, people in Scotland want climate leadership. They feel positive about government investment and leadership on this issue. And I think that's something that we not only need to remember, but we need to keep repeating as often as we can in the weeks and months ahead. So just to introduce you to the people that you will hear from today. So first of all, you will hear, as I said, from Becky Kenton-Lake, who is the Coalition Manager at Stop Climate Chaos Scotland. She'll then hand over to Emma, who is our lead researcher at Climate Outreach on this project. And then when we get into the Q&A towards the end, we will also be joined by Conleth Burns, who's the Associate Director for Strategy and Development at More in Common, and Dave Powell, who is our Senior Advocacy Manager at Climate Outreach. So with that, Becky, I will hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Rachel, and hi everyone. Yep, so I'm Becky Kenton-Lake. I'm from Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, which is a coalition of over 70 organisations who campaign together on climate change in Scotland. And thanks very much to Climate Outreach for inviting me to speak to open this launch of the research for Scotland. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes just to share some reflections on where we are just now. The many changes there have been, not just in the last few weeks, but in recent years that we've all kind of had to respond to, and the importance of this new research before we go into more detail on that from Emma. So yeah, it's definitely not just been the last few weeks or months that have been a turbulent time. Feels like since 2019 and the welcome kind of setting of strong climate targets by the Scottish Government, we've immediately had to deal with the news that Glasgow was hosting COP26, the pandemic, cost of living crisis, and as Rachel said, that many political changes both at Westminster and Holyrood. So also during this time, as I'm sure everyone is aware, global emissions have continued to rise and climate impacts have rapidly worsened, particularly in the global south, where communities did least to cause it. But also here in Scotland, people are increasingly seeing the impacts too. However, the one thing that hasn't changed over the last few years, despite all the other crises we face, is that climate and nature continue to be right up there in people's top concerns and priorities, and they really want decision makers to act. And I'm not going to give away any kind of more detailed spoilers for what Emma is about to tell us about the research, but both this from Climate Outreach and all the other evidence we see does clearly show that. Although sometimes it can be hard to believe, as over the last few years, we've also seen an increasingly loud and vocal minority trying to tell us the opposite. But for me personally, it's research like this that gives me additional motivation to make sure we are telling that story of people's concern and desire for actions to counter those negative narratives that sometimes seem to dominate. So let's not underestimate how widespread this concern for climate and nature is, and use that to build a really positive narrative of the need for change and action and how this can benefit all of us if done in the right way. So, I mean, as Rachel just said, with recent announcements about Scotland's climate targets, this research could not come at a better time, I think, and I'm really welcoming hearing more about it today, and for everyone to kind of get a bit more detail about the research that's been done into Scottish values and Scottish specific questions in the research. So please do have a look through it, see how you can embed it in your campaigns and communications, and let's all use this to start to change the narrative and turn that public concern into action by the decision makers that we all so urgently need. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Becky and Rachel, for your words. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma James, the lead researcher on this 2024 update of Britain Talks Climate. I'm really excited to be able to share with you today some of our insights from Scotland from this update to Britain Talks Climate. And I wanted to start today with sharing our 3 key findings across the research. So these are our key findings across Britain, but we're seeing them really landing in Scotland as well. So the first being appetite for climate action is strong and enduring. The second, climate leadership is more likely to win votes than lose them. It offers a source of hope and the potential for reconnection. And third, people don't want to be left alone with this, prioritise what's tangible and make transition fair. So we have these 3 key findings around that appetite for climate action, that desire for climate leadership, and that need for fairness from the transition, and not wanting to be left alone with this, and needing leadership to lead the way. So these are our 3 key findings across Britain, and as I said, landing in Scotland too. And now I'd like to tell a bit of a story about how we got to those 3 key findings. So I'll refer to the key findings as we go throughout this session today. But I'm going to start with a brief update on what is Britain Talks Climate and the 7 British segments. And I'll then explore our Scotland insights on appetite for climate action, climate leadership, fairness, and specific climate policies. And I will then hand back to Rachel, who will take us through some of the recommendations for policymakers and communicators that are coming out of this research. And of course, as Rachel said, we'll have time for questions at the end. So what is Britain Talks Climate? Britain Talks Climate is a resource to help us engage with the British public on climate change. This piece of research was originally launched in 2020, and it was a collaboration between Climate Outreach, More in Common, the European Climate Foundation, and YouGov. And so Britain Talks Climate exists to really help us better understand and engage with people's priorities, their questions, their concerns. It helps us tell clearer, more compelling climate stories that resonate with people of different values and different backgrounds. And so this is our free open access resource for anyone who wants to effectively understand how people in Britain think and feel about climate and nature. And so it's really a resource that's here to help you. It offers insights, recommendations, do's and don'ts for talking about climate change to people with different values and backgrounds. Within Britain Talks Climate features 7 different segments of the British population, and these are based on More in Common's core beliefs model. So you can see on the slide, we have 7 distinct audience segments across Britain, and these are segmented based on values, core beliefs, and identities. And what we've put on the slide here is the percentage breakdowns for the segments in Scotland. And so Britain Talks Climate and these 7 segments provides a shared and strategic understanding of the British public and identifies ways to engage across the whole of society. And this segmentation is more than simply left versus right, leave versus remain. And it really digs into a whole host of issues and areas, including politics, but also things like gender, race, and issues such as community and safety. And so I'll refer to some of these segments as we go through the session today, where we might want to highlight interesting differences. But what we're really going to be focusing on is what's shared. And so the 7 segments help to understand the differences across people, but it also really allows us to look at the similarity and where people have more in common, and where we can see what's shared across British people. And that's really what we'll focus on today. And as has already been talked about by Rachel and Becky, whilst we're seeing an awful lot of change in Scotland and across Britain with things like voting preferences, people's values aren't changing. The values that underpin these segments aren't changing, and this is why we use this segmentation and why it's powerful, and why we're sharing these insights today. So how we got to these key findings, our research methods for Britain Talks Climate 2024 followed a mixed methods approach. We started with 4 focus groups with 4 of the 7 British segments in December 2023. We then went on to conduct a nationally representative survey of 5,100 people with the 7 British segments. We boosted our sample in Wales and Scotland, so we had a 1,000 person nationally representative sample in Scotland. And we were really grateful and happy to have the collaboration and support of Keep Scotland Beautiful and Stop Climate Chaos Scotland when we were designing these questions specific to our Scotland sample. We then conducted 3 further focus groups with the final 3 remaining 7 British segments in February 2024, and then of course went on to data analysis and outputs and dissemination from April 2024. And in our focus groups, we talked to people from Edinburgh and Glasgow, so I'll be sharing some of our insights from those groups as we go through the session today. And as I go through the findings for Scotland, I think it's important to note that of course, the data was collected in January and February, and with the rapidly changing context since, we of course may mention a few policies that may have changed. So policies mentioned in the Butte House Agreement, for example, and of course some of these might change, but we think the insights on what people think about policies, the themes around what people might support and how policies are perceived are still very relevant. And so we're sharing these insights with you today. So I'm going to take you through our insights from Scotland across the 3 key findings. So the first being appetite for climate action is strong and enduring. So to start with our headline findings across Britain. So most people across Britain want to press ahead with net zero and believe that that would be good for the UK. And also most believe climate change should sit above short-term politics. We're seeing this across Britain and it's really landing in Scotland as well. We're seeing strong appetite for government to protect nature, reduce pollution and boost clean energy. And again, seeing this in Scotland, for example, Scots are more supportive of policies that directly benefit nature. And we see policies that feel drastic or punitive and carry significant costs for individuals tend to be the least popular. And so we'll really dig into our insights around cost and fairness and that as we go. And so these are our headline findings across Britain, but it's really landing in Scotland as well. And so in terms of our insights for Scotland specifically, people in Scotland want to press ahead with net zero. We're seeing that 62% want to either speed up or go at the current pace in efforts to reach net zero, and only 17% want to see a slowdown. So we presented some imaginary political parties to survey respondents. Party A was a party pledging to slow down efforts to reach net zero, and you can see that in orange on the graph. Party B, a party pledging to continue at a similar pace to the current government in efforts to reach net zero, represented in that lighter blue colour on the graph. And Party C, a party pledging to speed up efforts to reach net zero in that darker blue colour. And so we can see that lean towards wanting to either speed up or continue at a similar pace. People are wanting to press ahead with net zero. We've broken this graph down by rural and urban areas, and so we can see slight differences with those in urban city centres and large towns being slightly less likely to vote for a party pledging to slow down efforts to reach net zero compared to those in rural areas. But we can see broadly with that lean towards wanting to press ahead with net zero in Scotland. And during the focus groups, we really heard this wanting to press ahead and this appetite for climate action as well. And I sat in the focus groups and I really heard this from people in Scotland. A person from the segment we call Civic Pragmatists in Edinburgh said, when you look at delaying the electric car issue another 5 years, I mean, who's to say in 2 years' time they won't delay it further? This has been something that's been in the pipeline for a good while now. So to then just delay it another 5 years at the drop of a hat really just shows how they're not committed to it. And so there was that want to press ahead and that desire to not keep delaying things from people in Scotland in the focus groups. In terms of what people in Scotland think around political party approaches to climate change. We're seeing people in Scotland think climate change should sit above short-term politics. So 63% in Scotland would prefer politicians to agree a cross-party approach to tackling climate change. And this is compared to the 58% that we see across Britain thinking the same. So we really see that want for politicians to work together on climate change and for this issue to sit above short-term politics. This is a finding we think is really important right now for us to share and really, really interesting for us to share in the current context. Most people believe that reaching net zero will be good for Scotland as well. And so we asked the question, do you think that reaching net zero will be very good for Scotland, mostly good for Scotland, neither good nor bad, mostly bad, or very bad for Scotland? On the graph, the percentages of those who think net zero will be very good or mostly good is represented in orange. And what we're seeing is that most people believe that reaching net zero will be good for Scotland. And a key insight from this research in 2024 that we're seeing for Scotland is the influence of the politics of Scottish independence. So it's really a lens through which we're seeing feelings towards climate policy and net zero is really being filtered through. So what we can see on the graph here is we've broken this down by those that are for Scottish independence and against Scottish independence. And those who are for Scottish independence are much more likely to believe net zero will be very good or mostly good for Scotland. So it's really an influencing area that we're seeing coming through from this research. We also see that Scots think Scottish independence would be unaffordable without North Sea oil and gas. So we presented two statements and asked which people agree with most. The first being Scottish independence would be unaffordable without oil and gas from the North Sea, represented by in orange on the graph. And the second being Scottish independence could still be affordable without oil and gas from the North Sea, and that is represented by in blue on the graph. So we can see that the majority is thinking Scottish independence would be unaffordable without North Sea oil and gas. And what we can see on this graph is the differences across the 7 British segments as well. So we can see, for example, segments such as established liberals and those we call backbone conservatives. They are likely to think Scottish independence would be unaffordable without North Sea oil and gas. They're segments who tend to be concerned about the UK's economy and energy independence. And then similarly, we have segments that we call loyal nationals and disengaged battlers, again, more likely than not to believe Scottish independence would be unaffordable without North Sea oil and gas, and segments that tend to be more concerned about cost of living and higher energy bills. So this is where we can start to see some of the differences coming through across the segments. But in general, we can see that Scots do think Scottish independence would be unaffordable without North Sea oil and gas. But what we are seeing is people in Scotland are slightly more motivated to act on climate change than the rest of Britain. And so those that feel highly motivated to take action on climate change are towards the orange end of the graph, and those that feel not concerned about taking action on climate change towards the blue end of the graph. And so we can see that lean towards being more motivated than not. And if we look towards the bottom of the graph, we can see the Scotland bar, 45% are highly motivated to take action on climate change. And that is the largest percentage across all nations and regions of Britain. So we are seeing that motivation there to act on climate change, to press ahead with net zero. And again, this is something we were really hearing in the focus groups and that I heard, and the feeling I got from people in Scotland, and even among those that tend to be more disengaged. So a person from the segment we call disengaged battler from Glasgow said, I'm going to be like 48 next month, and I grew up in the 80s, and then we knew about the ozone and everything. And then before lockdown, it was really starting to ramp up about the environment. And I was thinking, do you know what? Actually, yes, I'd like to get involved in this. I'd like to be a part of all of this. And then it just stopped. And now I feel as if it's all a wee bit. We have to tick a box. We have to say we're doing this and we're setting back deadlines and things. But what's going to happen actually for our kids? And so even among those more disengaged, we are seeing that people want to get involved. They are motivated to act, and they want that kind of that pressing ahead by leadership rather than any delays happening to this. On to the second key finding. Climate leadership is more likely to win votes than lose them. It offers a source of hope and the potential for reconnection. Our key headline findings around this across Britain show that people feel positive about government spending on climate and environmental initiatives. This links to that word cloud that you can see on the slide. We asked people to write a word that would represent how they feel if the government pledged significant spending on climate and environmental initiatives, and 50% wrote a positive word. We also saw that happy was the word that was most cited, so 10% wrote happy. And so we're seeing that positivity around government spending. There's also broad agreement that it's not too late to act on climate change. However, relatively few feel that they've been consulted or informed on climate change, climate action, and climate policies by governments. And when it comes to why people would take part in engagement and consultation around climate change, many believe it's important that local people have a say in things that concern their local area. And many want to hear more about climate action by government, so they don't feel like they're hearing enough about what the government is doing on climate change. These are our key headline findings across Britain, and again, these are really landing in Scotland as well. And so in terms of our Scotland-specific insights, there is broad agreement among Scots that it is not too late to act on climate change. In fact, 62% of Scots think that there is still time for any UK government to implement meaningful policies to tackle climate change. And again, as well as that motivation to act and that wanting to press ahead, we heard this feeling of it not being too late in focus groups too. So a person from the segment we call civic pragmatists in Edinburgh said, the cost of living crisis is definitely a top concern. Also climate change as well. The thing that's disheartening about climate change, it seems like it keeps getting watered down again and again, and it's a bit disheartening. We're running out of time, but we're relaxing a lot of these policies, so it's very disheartening, I'd say. So what we're hearing is people think the time is now to act. They feel like it's not too late, but they feel like we really need to act now, and now is the time to do so. We are seeing that Scots are divided on whether the Scottish Government has done a better job than Westminster on climate change. And again, we're seeing this kind of filtered through that lens of the politics around Scottish independence as well. So 53% of supporters of Scottish independence say that the Scottish Government is doing a better job than Westminster on climate change, compared to just 11% of those who are against Scottish independence. And in focus groups, a person from the segment we call civic pragmatists in Edinburgh said, I don't think this current government deals with anything very well, to be honest. So yeah, I wouldn't say that they're dealing with climate change in an appropriate manner, and just like many other things that are ongoing at the moment. So these feelings were really, really coming through from people in Scotland through the focus groups as well. And similarly to our findings across Britain, few Scots feel informed or consulted on climate policies. And as well as feeling like they're not really being informed or consulted around climate policies and getting that information, we also see that people in Scotland would feel angry if the government didn't consult them about local kind of policies rolling out first. So we asked the question, imagine that the government has developed plans for a new wind farm in your local area. The government has decided to get on with the plans without consulting you or your community based on an assessment of electricity needs. Which of the following statements comes closest to your view? And the orange bars on the graph show the statement, I would feel angry or disappointed that the government didn't consult the community first. The grey is it would make no difference to how I feel about the government. And the blue, I would feel glad or relieved that the government was getting on with it. So we can see that there's that lean towards feeling angry or disappointed than feeling glad or relieved that the government was getting on with it. 49% in Scotland would feel angry or disappointed, and that's slightly more than the percent we see across England. So few feel informed in Scotland, and they also would feel angry or disappointed without being consulted first. And we also saw, similarly to our findings across Britain, that people in Scotland also feel like it's important that local people have a say in things that concern their local area, and they want to hear more about what the government are doing on climate change. This is something we really heard coming through in focus groups. I really got the feeling from people in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and in Glasgow, that there is that want for the option to be engaged. A person from the segment we call civic pragmatists in Edinburgh said, "The government needs to give us much more information before they make us promises. They should understand what it is the people, the public want, not just the people with money, the people without money as well, the things that they need. They should just listen more, they should listen better." And so that real want for the option to be engaged and consulted, that desire for more information from leaders, that desire to have voices heard was really coming through in our focus groups with people in Scotland. We also heard a fair amount of knowledge on local level policies around among participants in Scotland. So local level climate policies, we heard information, we heard knowledge on this among people in Scotland, but this very much seemed to stem from news and media consumption. And I didn't really get the feeling that they felt that they were getting this from government. It was very much from news consumption. A person from the segment we call Disengaged Battler from Glasgow said, "I don't know if I'm thinking about the same thing, because I think the one that I had watched on the news, they were talking about making things within your health centre and your chemists, and almost like small towns, that each place would have their own thing within a 15-minute travel from where your house is." So we've heard that knowledge on local level policies, but again, really coming through more from news and media consumption than any sort of consultation or information they were getting from governments. And so on to the final key finding: people don't want to be left alone with this. Prioritise what's tangible and make transition fair. Our key headline findings across Britain around this show people are concerned about what the transition will cost them. The segments are very worried about higher energy costs as a result of the transition. And the segments are most likely to say that expecting everyone to pay for new low carbon technologies themselves is going too far. So we're seeing that feeling that people don't think everyone should pay for the transition across Britain. There is low perceived fairness of climate change approaches set out by political parties and their leaders. And when it comes to specific climate policies around public transport and home heating, across Britain in general, people tend to think public transport policies might be fair to them, but home heating policies will be unfair to them. So again, these are our findings across Britain, but they're really landing in Scotland, with a few slight kind of differences as well that we're seeing in Scotland that we'll go through now. So in terms of fairness and climate policy in Scotland, people in Scotland are slightly more likely than average to think that expecting everyone to pay for new low carbon technologies themselves is going too far. So that concern around cost and that fairness point of everyone paying, this is something that that people in Scotland are thinking about and talking about, and they feel like expecting everyone to pay for new low carbon technologies themselves is going too far. And again, we heard this coming through in focus groups as well. A person from the segment we call Disengaged Battler in Glasgow said, "So what are we going to do right now with all the other issues we've been discussing? But why should we care about environmental things? We can't even heat our houses. Do you know what I mean? And if we're going on about heat pumps and everything else, but nobody can afford it, then why are we going to vote that in? There's, again, lots of endgame stuff, but no infrastructure for it." So I was really hearing in focus groups that concern around costs and how things will be paid for. Of course, we heard that motivation to act from the segments in Scotland as well, but there is that concern around cost, and that was really coming through from the focus groups. Similarly, a person from the segment we call Civic Pragmatists in Edinburgh said, "In the future, I would like to get potentially a heat pump if there was a government grant, but in the middle of a cost of living crisis, I don't have 5k kicking around." So that concern around cost and how things will be fair is really coming through from people in Scotland. When it comes to specific climate policies, so first we have public transport, whereas we saw across Britain people tending to think that public transport policies might be fair to them. In Scotland, we see Scots are divided on whether public transport policies will be fair or unfair to them. And it's important to note as well that we also see people in Scotland slightly more likely than average to use public transport. So we asked the question, thinking about the policies relating to public transport that the government could put in place over the next 10 years to transition away from fossil fuels, do you think they will definitely be fair to people like me, probably be fair to people like me, probably be unfair, or definitely be unfair? And so the percentages of those who think these public transport policies will definitely be fair or probably be fair to them is shown in orange on the graph, and those who think probably be unfair or definitely be unfair shown in blue on the graph. And so if we look at that top bar for the full sample in Scotland, we can see that divide on whether people are thinking public transport policies will be fair or unfair to them. We've also broken this chart down by rural and urban areas, and we can see that those in urban city centres and larger towns are slightly more likely to think that public transport policies will be fair to them compared to those in rural areas. But in general, we can see that divide over whether these policies will be fair or unfair to them. And then when it comes to home heating policies, in general, we see people across Britain tend to think home heating policies will be unfair to them, and this includes those in Scotland. And so we asked a similar question, except we asked about policies relating to home heating that the government could put in place over the next 10 years to transition away from gas boilers. Again, we see that those who feel these will be definitely or probably be fair is represented in orange on the graph, and definitely or probably unfair in blue. And here, when it comes to home heating policies, we can see more of that lean towards thinking these policies will be unfair. And so again, we've looked at this by rural and urban areas, and we can see that when it comes to home heating policies, as well as public transport policies, those in urban city centres and larger towns are more likely to feel like these might be fair to them than those in rural areas. And just to finish off from me, back to the 3 key findings from our Britain Talks Climate 2024 update. Appetite for climate action is strong and enduring. Climate leadership is more likely to win votes than lose them. It offers a source of hope and the potential for reconnection. And people don't want to be left alone with this. Prioritise what's tangible and make transition fair. And so we're seeing these 3 things across Britain, but really landing in Scotland as well. And I'll now hand back to Rachel, who will take us through some of the recommendations coming out of this work.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emma. We're now going to turn on the Q&A. So if you have some questions you would like to put to the panel, if you could start posting those in the Q&A bar. While you're doing that, there's obviously a huge amount of data and insight and analysis that Emma has just presented. But we thought when we were kind of looking through all of this and analysing it, there were a few key recommendations for our policymakers and for communicators. So we just want to whiz you through those before we move into the Q&A. So to start with, some recommendations for governments or policymakers. So if you work for the Scottish Government, or you are a policymaker, or you have the ear of one of these groups of people, 5 key things that we think comes through from this research. The first is that I think we heard through all the surveys and the focus groups that we need to be clearer that tackling climate change is a collective national endeavour led by government. A lot of people feel they're trying to do their bit, and they want to feel more that they are part of something bigger. And I think we need a bigger shared story and plan that is kind of more effectively communicated about what that is and what that looks and feels like. As Emma has just been saying, this concept of fairness is non-negotiable. It is wickedly complicated, but it's not something that we can put in the too difficult box. We think that there is a big opportunity that we can seize to be innovative and bold in rolling out clean energy. There's lots of exciting stuff happening in Scotland in terms of new wind farms. But I think how we do that more across the country, and in particular, if there's more we can do around community-owned energy, we see a huge opportunity there for jobs, for investment, and for kind of engaging people in what the green transition looks like. We have to listen to, learn from, and respond genuinely to the people who are most nervous about change. I don't think this is something we have done effectively yet, and I think it is where we see a lot of the kind of backlash and pushback. So I think we need to be much bolder and more deliberate about doing this and investing in doing it properly. And kind of linked to that, Climate Outreach firmly believes that we need to develop a national plan that sets out how we really listen to and inspire the whole country on the climate transition. This is going to affect everybody, and it has to involve everybody too. And then just finally, a few thoughts for climate communicators. So all of you who are here joining us today, there are some things that we need to do, keep doing, do more of. Highlight the widespread support for the leadership on climate and nature that came through really strongly in this research. As Becky mentioned at the beginning, it's also echoed in other research, but I don't think we own it and talk about it often enough. Linked to that, we need to keep on drawing out the connections between a healthy climate, thriving nature, and our own well-being. People are already making that link, and I think as communicators and storytellers, we can help them to do that, and we can elevate it. We can do it more. Linked to that, we can connect our British obsession with the weather to growing climate concern. Again, we heard that people are already seeing and feeling some of the impacts of climate change, particularly this winter around flooding. And we love thinking about talking about the weather, especially in Scotland, where, as you all know, you can easily experience all 4 seasons in one day. So how can we start gently, subtly bringing in that climate conversation into that conversation about the weather? We have to be better at talking about the progress that is already underway. More and more people need to know that climate progress isn't just possible, it's already happening. So how can we be much, much better at highlighting, spotlighting the brilliant stuff that's happening from, local people planting trees or growing allotments to communities saying yes to solar farms. And finally, we have to recognise that for a lot of people, change can be scary. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you just how hard so many people are finding it to just make ends meet and get from week to week and month to month. And we have to much better listen to and understand those worries and other concerns in all our narratives and our communications. And finally, a few things that we need to really try and make sure we're not doing. We need to not fuel the idea that tackling climate change is all about more hardship and more sacrifice. There is so much that we can benefit from in the transition to a kind of greener, low carbon future. And that is the story that we need to tell far more often. We need to talk much less or not talk at all of drastic or draconian approaches. As Emma highlighted, the difference in framing when you talk about kind of gradually transitioning away from fossil fuels to immediately stopping drilling is really stark. So how do we bring people on that journey and kind of understand that this is a process? And we need to make sure we're not pitting different aspects of the climate and nature crisis against each other. Again, this is really difficult. Of course, there are trade-offs. Of course, there are difficult decisions that will need to be made. But seeing climate and nature as intertwined, as most people do, and continuing to talk about that and foreground that in our stories and communications, we think is really vital. So thank you for listening as we've kind of walked you through all of that. We now have the opportunity to take some of your questions, which are coming in the Q&A bar. Please keep posting questions as we go through them. The first question is from Liz, asking if the data is available. Liz, if you go to Climate Outreach's website, there's a huge amount of information contained there in our Britain Talks Climate Toolkit. If there's anything else that is of particular interest, then feel free to get in touch with us and we'll see if we can supply it to you. So to some other questions. This is a really interesting one from Stuart. What do you think the right message from the research for the Scottish third sector might be? So let's take that one first. Becky, I don't know if you're happy to kick us off on that one, and then we'll maybe hear from Dave as well.
Yes, I think Stuart's asking here about what's the kind of key takeaway for the third sector from this research, and I think the do's and don'ts and the kind of key learnings there from Rachel will set out the kind of main things for me, and I'm already screenshotting that slide just to make sure I've got all that there. But I think for me it's about looking at who your audience is and what their values are and what resonates with them. So the 7 sectors are there, and we've got all that data about what they all think about different policies and different things. And so I think it's just about working out who it is you're trying to communicate with and using the research to really make sure you're tailoring your messages and communicating in a way that resonates well with them. That's certainly something I'm going to be looking at doing for Stop Climate Chaos. So that's the kind of key thing I would suggest.
Thanks, Becky. Dave, is there anything to add from you?
No, I do think you mostly covered it. I think one of the most important things going on in politics in general, in Scotland as well at the moment, is that sense of people feeling generally quite dissatisfied and frustrated, and we're seeing that in our data. And where there are backlashes on net zero, I think they're grounding in that sense is kind of grounding in this issue, as opposed to it being particularly something people are necessarily sort of concerned about. So I think that in communications terms for everyone, but particularly for the third sector, I think it's really about getting that story right of what this means in practice tangibly to what, you know, the government would call hard-working people, and kind of what that means. Spending a bit of time to understand that, getting the language right, listening to the way that people talk about this is really important. And then running through so much of our communications advice is partnering with organizations or using trusted messengers. We have a launch on some new work on trust in a few weeks coming up, which we can put a link to as well. To make sure that the story is one that just feels like it is talking to Scotland right now and to what people care about right now, and that what can seem like a kind of diffuse technical term, this net zero thing, is felt to be real and felt to be a benefit to people. And the more you can tell that story, the better it's going to be.
Fab. Thank you, Dave. There are a few more questions here about the kind of data and the insights. Yes, a lot of this is on our website. There's also a recording of our kind of UK-wide launch webinar. This recording will be added to our website in the next day or so. But again, please have a look through. And if there are specific bits of the data that you are particularly interested in that you can't find on our website, then just drop Climate Outreach an email and we'll see if we can kind of respond to those specifically. There's a question here that'd be great for Conleth to come in on from Andy about how people were chosen to do the survey or where they came across it, and a bit of a disparity between the dominant segments and the results which people say they want action on net zero. So Conleth, are you able to come in on kind of survey design and then kind of differences in the segments on a couple of those topics?
Sure. So the first thing, we did a nationally representative sample of people in Scotland, so 1,000 people in Scotland representative to the kind of Scottish quotas. So it's a sample like kind of any other polling sample that you've had. It's a good sample. 1,000 people is the kind of standard for a representative sample in Scotland, and it was using an online panel, so it was not kind of self-selecting the way that some surveys are. It's a panel. There's a selection bias in that you need to be on one of these panels, but there are tens of thousands of people in Scotland on these panels, so we think it's a relatively good sample, and the kind of quality checks versus other panels in Scotland were all passed from our end. On focus groups, I mean, we for this project did the focus groups with civic pragmatists, disengaged battlers, and some established shippers. I think we had in Scotland as well. I've done previous work with loyal nationals in Scotland and with all of the segments actually in Scotland as well. So we have, you know, the broad kind of findings that we get that are kind of applicable across the whole country are consistent also in Scotland. I think there is some lessons that we can learn politically within Scotland about how we communicate to that loyal national group in particular, and the ending of the Butte House Agreement gives an opportunity, I think, for climate communicators and climate policy makers in Scotland to think about how do we message to that kind of swing voter loyal national who has very high threat perception, for example. And one really interesting example of this was one of the policies we tested around £500 million fund for just transition. that had lower support. I mean, it still had relatively high net support, but it had lower support than some other more tangible policies because one, it wasn't tangible. Two, the kind of frame just transition doesn't mean a lot to people when it's not tied to jobs or bills or regeneration or any of those kind of things. So the way to kind of internalize some of this research is actually both from a policy perspective and from communications perspective. How do we design things that aren't just communicating to quite highly engaged people who live and breathe climate every day, but people, this Loyal National group in particular, who actually really quite scared about climate. You have to do it in a sensitive way and in a sensible way because you don't want to up their threat perception more than it needs to be, but they are scared about climate change. And so part of your communication has to be, how do we tone that? How do we kind of respond to that fear that they have? And it has to be really practical. So the more practical you can make those policies. And also, I think in Scotland, there is a kind of patriotic case that you can make about Scottish exceptionalism on some of this stuff. We can go faster than some other places. That I think, Andy, your question was there, that it's worrying that some people want to slow down. I mean, my view on that is that it's perfectly rational for people to say we want to slow down whenever you're asking people to change how they heat their home, change their car, change how they get about talking about costs and all that kind of stuff. It's perfectly reasonable to say slow down a minute because that sounds scary, and that is scary. So you have to make the case to them to say we need to move faster because it's in your interests for us to move faster.
Fantastic. Thank you, Conleth. I'm going to take a couple more questions and we'll ask people to come in on either or both of them. So there's one here from Stephen. Is just transition a phrase that is used or understood more widely? And a suggestion, maybe fair transition might be something that we want to think about. And then there's another question here saying there are a lot of opportunities to engage with policy development, but people choose not to and then complain that they aren't consulted. How can we make these opportunities clearer to, in inverted commas, normal people? Emma, I don't know if you want to kick off on either of those, and then Becky will maybe come to you as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to just transition, like what we were really hearing in focus groups is people want things to be fair, but they don't. It doesn't necessarily mean kind of the same things to everyone. And I think fair transition might mean more things to people because they want things to be fair. Then maybe that maybe sits kind of more, I guess, of a norm to people. We did do some message testing. I think we didn't necessarily do message testing around kind of just transition the wording. We did more message testing around things like net zero and seeing that kind of more sort of balancing framings rather than more absolute language tend to work better when it comes to things like net zero. I don't know if maybe Conleth will have more insights on sort of just transition as a framing and how that works. But I think in terms of fairness, we know we were hearing and we were seeing in the survey that people want things to be fair. It just often means different things to different people. But yeah, I don't know if Conleth, you have any more insights on kind of the frame of just transition.
Yeah, I haven't tested it in Scotland in particular, but when we've done focus groups in England before on just transition, justice is seen by people in the kind of judicial process. That's the kind of initial kind of way that they think about it, rather than a broader sense of kind of social justice. So the fairness in they can kind of get a bit more. But regardless of whether you use fairness or justice, I mean, there's not a huge difference between those things. It's being tangible about what you mean by that, and that also means being willing to criticize pro-climate policy that's unfair or unjust, and that takes confidence. But because sometimes we're like, oh, we just need to get there, and it doesn't matter if it's fair or just. If you're talking about fairness and justice, you really have to mean that, and that also means criticizing your own side, and people who are pro-climate advocates whenever they get it wrong on climate policies on that as well.
Thanks, Conleth. Becky, did you want to come in on either of these?
Yeah, just really agree with what's been said already on just transition. That seems to make a lot of sense. And I think talking about fairness is obviously something that's much more widely understood and I think would resonate more with people. I mean, just on the other question about the policy development and consultations, completely agree that it's hard enough when you're working in the sector to kind of keep up with everything that's coming out, let alone kind of being a member of the public, kind of trying to engage. So there are definitely barriers to getting kind of opinions across. And I think we just need to think about different ways of engaging people. I think through kind of community leaders, faith leaders, kind of different people who can represent different groups, making sure that those views are, those kind of opportunities are communicated and people are represented. And obviously that needs to come from government as well to make sure that they're getting those messages across to as many different audiences as possible. So yeah, I don't know if Dave has any thoughts as well. I don't have all the same solutions there.
Well, I just wanted to quickly just come in on the consultation point. I mean, there are slightly sidestep it. There are loads of ways that people can get involved in stuff. But I also think from a communications point of view, something to say is I think there's a sort of general sense that people want to feel that they have had a say or that people like them have had a say, which is not necessarily the same thing as people wanting to spend all day, as you say in the question, filling in consultations. And the other thing we know from our data is that people are broadly supportive of action, and that cuts right across the whole of society. So in our communications, a slightly indirect answer to your question is helping people to see that people like them actually already support this, and that there are benefits to people like me that can come from doing various policies. I think that's really important as well, is creating a sense that this is in people's interest, people like them like it, and pointing to the sheer amount of support for the action that we want to see is a really important part of helping people to feel that they have had a say and to build trust, I think, in the general direction stuff.
Brilliant, thank you all. I'm now going to attempt to do two things at once. So I'm going to ask you all who've joined today, please don't leave. We're going to ask you if you can leave us with one comment from you about what you have taken in particular from today or might do with some of the insights. So in just a second, a little Mentimeter is going to appear on your screen, and we would be really, really grateful if you could just take a couple of moments to scan that QR code or visit that website and then just post straight onto the screen just a quick headline thought or insight about what you how you may use these insights, why it's useful to you. Just as you're doing that, there was a question from Gillian about the insights about the framing. And Gillian, I think your question was in the British, the kind of UK-wide webinar. We talked about the framing of protecting nature and wildlife as being the most kind of resonant frame, and whether that was true for Scotland as well. So I'm just going to ask Emma to answer that. And as she is, please, if you are able just to make a brief commitment on this Mentimeter about what you might do with the Scotland Insights and the Britain Talks Climate toolkit, we would be immensely grateful. But Emma, yes, on the climate and nature.
Thank you for the question. And yes, that is exactly right. We really saw the kind of concern and framing around nature and wildlife landing in Scotland as well. Absolutely. So when we were asking about impacts that people are most worried about around climate change, harm coming to nature and wildlife was the case as the top concern across Britain, but also in Scotland. Followed by increased risk of floods and causing bills and other costs to rise. And yeah, so really landing in Scotland as well. And when we were thinking about and asking about specific policies, we really saw people in Scotland being kind of more supportive of those policies that directly benefit nature. So things around kind of highly protected marine areas and things like that, we really saw that support. So absolutely concern for nature and wildlife is definitely high in Scotland as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. And thank you all so much for these comments and commitments that are starting to kind of come through on the screen here. These are so useful to us, and we are We're really proud of the fact that the Britain Talks climate work is open source, that it's available for anybody who wants to understand a bit more about how people think and feel about climate change, and who wants to use it to think about how they are communicating and listening to different people. So these are incredibly useful for us as we kind of think about what we can do with this work next. More bluntly, they're also really, really helpful for us when we're talking to funders about the importance of continuing to support work like this and the value that it has, not just for climate outreach, but for a kind of much wider group of people. So if you do happen to be someone who can support this kind of work in future, we would, of course, love to hear from you. If you're someone who wants to use this work and there's more questions that you have or more ways that we can kind of help you to do that, please do get in touch with us. But please do use all the tools on the toolkit, and we hope it's kind of useful to you in your future work. I just want to finish by saying a huge thank you. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists and especially to Becky and to Emma for their fantastic presentations today. And just to a massive thanks to our partners and supporters, to More in Common, to ECF, to Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, and to Keep Scotland Beautiful. And yes, thank you all very much for giving us your time today at what we know is a really, really kind of fraught and busy time, but when we hope that kind of insights about how we really foreground that widespread support that we know exists across Scotland for kind of bold action and leadership on climate change, just how important that is that we kind of hold on to that and keep on talking about it. So thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your day.